On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, Day 166. Hamas representative in Lebanon states that Israel's response to the first day of negotiations does not meet the minimum requirements of the movement. Commanders of Hamas's emergency committees in charge of aid and governance of civilian matters in the Gaza Strip have been assassinated from the northern parts of the Gaza Strip to the south. The IDF operation in Al-Shifa hospital continues. Khalid al-Batash, a very senior member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, was reportedly arrested in the compound. The IDF carried out an assassination of a prominent local Palestinian Islamic Jihad operative in the West Bank town of Jenin. UN committee investigating UNRWA submits preliminary findings, points to mechanisms UNRWA employs to ensure neutrality but also to critical areas that need improvement. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu addresses Republican senators in the United States after his request to speak to Democratic senators was reportedly denied. Hello everyone, I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here to bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It was during the evening of March 20th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 21st, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, Hamas's representative in Lebanon, Osama Hamdan, stated today that Israel's response to Hamas's demands in the hostage negotiations do not meet the minimum requirements of the movement, adding that Netanyahu and, quote, his terrorist government are personally responsible for torpedoing the deal. Despite this rhetoric, it's important to note that the negotiating teams are still on the ground in Qatar, and Hamas has not actually given its official answer to Israel's latest response. Where things lie now is that Hamas gave its answer after several weeks of the Paris summit. Israel then sent this team to Qatar. They are now negotiating if a breakthrough can be reached. If so, likely the higher levels of the negotiating teams, the head of the Mossad and possibly Ismail Haniyeh, the external leader of Hamas, will get involved in order to seal the deal. Right now, each side is just probing. In addition to this, visiting Saudi Arabia today, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated that the sides are getting closer to a hostage deal, adding that a good deal was on the table in the Paris summit, but Hamas added more terms that ended up complicating things. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars that were reported fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the activity in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF's operation in Al-Shifa hospital continues. This is the third day that the IDF is operating within the hospital compound. Thus far, it has been reported that 90 Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives have been killed in gun battles in the compound. It was also reported today that in addition to the substantial weaponry that the IDF has found, what was also confiscated in the compound was money worth roughly $3 million US dollars that was discovered both in US and Jordanian currency that was destined to fund terror operations both within the hospital compound and more broadly within the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Until now, roughly 3,400 Palestinians reportedly evacuated from the hospital area, and another 350 Palestinians were arrested. Of those who were arrested, 160 have already been taken back to Israel to the Shabak interrogation, and in addition to this, there's some interesting reports about some of the prominent figures who were arrested. According to reports, these include senior field operatives, including battalion commanders of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas senior political officials. Among them are Muhammad Kawasme. He's a senior Hamas operative who was released in the Shalit deal of 2011 and expelled to the Gaza Strip, from where he became one of the people within Hamas in charge of terror attacks in the West Bank. He was reportedly one of the architects of the abduction and killing of 3 Israelis in the West Bank in 2014, which ended up launching the 2014 war and the previous IDF invasion into Gaza. In addition to this, Palestinian sources also reported that Khalid al-Batash, who's a senior member of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad Political Bureau and arguably one of the most prominent known figures of the movement, was also arrested today in Al-Shifa hospital. It's important to note this is unconfirmed by the IDF or other sources yet. However, if it is true, it will be the most high-profile arrest of a member of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad that the IDF has carried out since the war began. In addition to the activity in Al-Shifa hospital, Palestinian sources also reported that Amjad Hattat, who's the head of the civil aid projects of Hamas in western Gaza City and the person in charge of the group's emergency committees in the region, was assassinated today in Gaza City. This comes amidst the assassination of the Hamas chief of police in a Nuseirat refugee camp yesterday. By now, this appears to be a systematic effort by the IDF to target Hamas field leaders who are in charge of civil coordination, any type of civil governance, as well as anyone who's affiliated with either escorting, securing, or possibly diverting and stealing the humanitarian aid that is coming into the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, airstrikes were also reported in the Jabalia refugee camp against the Hamas unit, and an operational tunnel from which rockets were launched in the last several weeks was also targeted in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Han Yunis, the Al-Qassam brigades reported firing Yasin 105 missiles against IDF troop carriers in the Al-Qarara region. While this was unconfirmed by the IDF, there was a large amount of IDF soldiers who were injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, so it may be in this incident. In Rafah, the IDF and the Shabak announced today the assassination of 4 commanders of Hamas's emergency committees on Monday. These committees are the main link between the Hamas leadership and the field operations of Hamas, and they are in charge of implementing Hamas decisions in the field and facilitating the organization's governance. It's important to understand that the emergency committees are not actually part of the military wing of Hamas. They are part of Hamas's attempt during the war to still exert some governance over different parts of Gaza. One of the things that they've been very active in is helping to secure the different aid convoys, and in addition to this, also stealing a lot of the aid and diverting it to Hamas. This appears to be a systematic thing that the IDF is doing in the last several weeks in different parts of the Gaza Strip from the north to the south, targeting these different units, anyone who may be involved in them, in order to stop Hamas from exerting any type of governance. The 4 who were assassinated on Monday are Said Katab el-Hashash, Usama Hamid Dahir, Muhammad Awad Malalhi, and Hadi Abu Uros. Abu Uros is also the operations commander of the emergency committees more broadly in the region. The others are commanders of the committees in the Rafah region. In addition to this, it was also reported that Nidal al-Eid was assassinated last week. He was in charge of the entire Rafah district and operating these different emergency committees. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. Israel's Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant is due to meet the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin next week. Leading up to their meeting, the Pentagon announced today that Austin spoke to Gallant and told him that while both countries share the joint goal of defeating Hamas, alternatives to a Rafah invasion must be considered. Amidst this, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu put out a recorded message today relating to the Rafah operation. He pledged that the operation will happen and stated that he has already approved plans for it and that soon plans will be approved for the evacuation of Palestinian civilians from the area. He stated that it is no secret that there are disagreements with the U.S. administration over this, but that ultimately Israel will do what's necessary for its own security, adding that it may take a bit more time and that the U.S. President Biden asked to present the Israeli delegation the proposals that his team has put together for the humanitarian situation in Rafah. So this is the 2 different narratives that are being developed about these different meetings, both an Israeli delegation that is making its way to the United States and the meeting between Israel's Minister of Defense Gallant and the U.S. Secretary of Defense Austin. In Israel, the narrative is that what's being discussed is Israel is going to present its plans for the Rafah invasion and hear about humanitarian situations and solutions, whereas in the United States what's being reported is that the Israeli delegations and the Minister of Defense are coming to hear about alternative plans to an invasion. It remains to be seen how this is played out. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldier was reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This leaves the number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 251. 14 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,496. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 104 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 31,923. 74,096 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began. There's still several thousand Palestinians that are buried under the rubble from the bombings and are presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, as part of its activity in Al-Shifa Hospital, the IDF reported today that it coordinated the entrance of fuel trucks and humanitarian aid trucks into the hospital, consisting of 1,800 liters of water and 3.8 tons of food. In addition to this, Singapore joined the countries that are carrying out paradropping aids into the Gaza Strip today. According to reports in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, aid was paradropped today by 2 U.S. planes, 1 plane respectively from Jordan, Egypt, Germany, and, as I stated, from Singapore. In addition to this, the UK Foreign Office announced that the country has delivered 2,000 tons of food that will be distributed to 275,000 people in the Gaza Strip. The shipments were reportedly transferred through Jordan and will be distributed by the World Central Kitchen on the ground in the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, 150 more tons of aid are also being sent by the UK to be distributed by UNICEF throughout the Strip. Other news, the UN committee investigating the allegations against UNRWA presented its preliminary findings to the UN Secretary General yesterday. The committee's charter is to investigate whether UNRWA is doing, quote, all that it can in order to ensure the neutrality of the organization. While the report itself was not published, the UN did report that the report states, at least again, this is the preliminary findings, that UNRWA employs a substantial array of mechanisms and procedures to ensure the principles of humanitarian neutrality. However, it also finds critical fields which require addressing. Other news, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated today that work on the pier in Gaza will commence in 2 weeks. Speaking to the Saudi Al Hadath news network, he added that the U.S. is pressuring Israel to open more land crossings into the Gaza Strip, but that Hamas does not care about the humanitarian conditions in Gaza, or else the movement would make more concessions in the hostage negotiations. Moving on to the West Bank, in a rare move that happened today, the IDF carried out an assassination in the Jenin refugee camp using a drone attack. The target, a Palestinian Islamic Jihad operative named Ahmed Barkat, had carried out a terror attack 10 months ago in a settlement in the West Bank, killing an Israeli. In the car there were reportedly 4 operatives of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, 3 of whom, Ahmed Barkat, Muhammad al-Faid, and Muhammad Rahal, were all killed according to Palestinian sources. A 4th, one of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad commanders in the Jenin region, Muhammad Hawashin, was reportedly injured. After the assassination, during the funerals, gunfire was reported in Jenin between armed groups and the security officials of the Palestinian Authority, with the Palestinian Authority being accused of enabling the IDF activity, and the different operatives within Jenin demanding that the Palestinian Authority release anyone who has been arrested for violent activity against Israelis in the region. In addition to this, there was substantial IDF activity reported throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Among others, this was reported in the villages of Anata and Izeria, Tulkarm refugee camp, and Nablus. 34 Palestinians reported arrested throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours, and substantial weaponry was also confiscated. In addition, later into the night, the IDF reported launching an operation in the Nur al-Shams refugee camp near Tulkarm, with the opening shot being an aerial attack killing 2 armed Palestinian operatives in the region. This operation, described as a major one, is expected to last several hours. It began about an hour before recording this, so we'll learn more about this tomorrow. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were substantial rocket attacks and missile attacks from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel today. However, as I've stated in the last several days, while there are barrages of rockets and missiles and IDF attacks, these are less than the escalations that we saw in the last several weeks. Rockets targeted the areas of Nir On, Hardov, Misgav Am, and Margaliot. There were also earlier barrages towards the areas of Kiryat Shmona and Kfar Giladi and Tel Chai. Hezbollah also claimed responsibility for a shooting attack at an IDF outpost near the areas of Avivim. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes reportedly attacked Hezbollah military structures in the Hula region and lookout posts in the Kila village and Yerun. Military structures were also targeted in the Kanatra area after a Hezbollah operative was identified in the area, and other attacks were also reported in the areas of Andoria. Lebanese sources reported that an operative of the Amal movement, rather than Hezbollah, named Muhammad Ali Musa Kamiha, was killed in the Kanatra attack, so it is possible that the operative that was identified was in fact an Amal operative, or that these are 2 different operatives in 2 different attacks. In addition to this, Lebanese sources also reported that the IDF carried out attacks in the areas of Meruhin, Yarin, and Ita Sha'ab. Al-Manar reported that there was fire in Al-Hayam as well, and Al Jazeera also reported artillery fire in the areas of Abbasiyah. Moving on to some of the regional developments, after I reported yesterday that there was an attack in Syria and rumors began to surface that members of a pro-Iranian militia were killed, Sky News in Arabic reported today that the attack appears to have been carried out by U.S. drones rather than an Israeli attack. The attacks were carried out in the areas of El Miad and in the region of Deir Azor, and reportedly targeted a meeting between the General Secretary of Hezbollah and Iraq brigades and other operatives. Thus far, it has been reported that 5 different operatives of a pro-Iranian militia were killed. However, it was not reported who these people are, and if this includes the General Secretary of Hezbollah in Iraq. Hezbollah in Iraq is one of the organizations that has been very active in attacking different U.S. targets throughout the Middle East, including one of the organizations that took responsibility for the attack against the base Tower 22. Moving on to the political and general trends of the last 24 hours, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed the Republican senators today during their weekly meeting via video conference. This comes amidst all of the tension between Netanyahu and the Biden administration and the major criticism that was leveled at him by the Senate Majority Leader from the Democratic side, Chuck Schumer. In his address, he stated, among others, that Schumer's words about him were inappropriate and outrageous, and re-emphasized that Israel intends to operate in Rafah despite the objections of the U.S. administration, stating, "Even if we have to go in alone, we will not stop." In addition, it was later reported that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, of the Republican side, is considering inviting Netanyahu to address a session of Congress. However, it is also noteworthy that this would require the agreement of the Senate Majority Leader Schumer, so it is unclear if that actually will happen. Amidst this, it was reported today that Netanyahu appealed to Schumer and asked to address the Democratic senators during their weekly meeting as well. There were conflicting reports regarding if Schumer denied this or simply did not answer. The sources that stated that he denied this added that Schumer had said that such an address should not be a partisan matter. However, again, different sources stated if it was actually denied or, to some extent, simply ignored. Other news, responding to the weapons embargo that Canada declared on weapons exports to Israel, the U.S. State Department stated today that the decision will not affect U.S. policy and that the United States is consistent on Israel's right to defend itself while guaranteeing the safety of innocent civilians. Other political news, a report was published today that the IDF is beginning to prepare for when international journalists are allowed into the Gaza Strip after the war. The International Law Department in the IDF is being expanded to be its own division, and hundreds of files are being compiled in order to justify the attacks that the IDF carried out throughout the war. It was also reported that there is grave concern about the phenomenon of IDF soldiers who took videos and photos of themselves in the Gaza Strip, either looting or taking revenge against both Palestinians and more broadly looting and carrying out acts in the Gaza Strip. And there's expectation that the IDF is going to have to deal with thousands of legal cases and potential international arrest warrants that will be issued against IDF soldiers for the years to come, and thus the IDF's international unit is being expanded from being a unit to its own division, and the IDF is preparing for what will happen in the day after the war. Moving on to the future of the Gaza Strip, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken began his Middle East tour today. This is his sixth visit to the region since the war began. Speaking in Saudi Arabia, he stated that the United States has a vision for peace in the region, and that part of his visit is going to be discussing the governing bodies in the Gaza Strip the day after the war as part of this vision. In a meeting with the Saudi foreign minister and with the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, Blinken again emphasized that the aim of getting a 6-week truce is to start the hostage deal, however, to then build something broader, saying that this will lay the groundwork towards a larger ceasefire. He emphasized in their meeting that the U.S. is committed to achieving a viable regional peace deal and to achieve a lasting peace by establishing an independent Palestinian state with security guarantees for Israel. Blinken is expected to arrive in Israel on Friday for a visit that's going to be just a few hours. There he's going to discuss this with Israel. He is likely to hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel has a different vision for the Gaza Strip. Remains to be seen how this plays out and how this fits into the growing escalations and tensions between the Netanyahu government and the U.S. administration. If you enjoy these reports, please do remember to subscribe, give them a like, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. If you'd like me to put out special videos about different topics, also feel free to leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.